the current reigning and defending undisputed AFC champions of 2022. And for a couple of years, and pretty much actually for a long time, but in more recent times, the Cincinnati Bengals were pretty much pure dog shit. In 2019, they were pretty much the worst team in the NFL, going 2-14. But it was pretty much, I guess, somewhat beneficial for Cincinnati because, well, they won the number 1 overall pick in the NFL pandemic draft. And in that pandemic draft, they selected LSU quarterback Joe Burrow. But unfortunately, just months later, in that pandemic season, the Joe Burrow era got off to a really rough start. Actually, it got cut really short. It broke an offensive line in that game against the Washington football team, caused Joe Burrow to get sacked really hard. And he tore his ACL. And then from there, the Bengals, they just dragged to a 4-11 finish. But they did manage to get a top 5 pick with the 5th overall pick. So during the last offseason, they did some free agents like Trey Hendrickson from the New Orleans Saints, Mike Hillen from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and defensive tackle Larry Ogunjobi. I'm sorry for mispronouncing that. And then in the draft, of course, their biggest pickup of all during the offseason was getting the 5th overall pick to net Joe Burrow's LSU teammate in Ja'Marr Chase, his big wide receiver. Now, of course, it's still debatable of whether or not getting Ja'Marr Chase was the right decision over, well, perhaps what was the one thing that the Bengals front office ignored in that offseason last year, the offensive line. For whatever reason, whether it was in free agency or the draft, the one aspect of the thing that got Joe Burrow injured in the first place, the Bengals didn't even bother to upgrade. And it was pretty concerning for Mr. Burrow because, well, something like that could happen again. And he's just coming off a major injury. So for Cincinnati, yes, they were hoping big things for Burrow in year 2, and they got him his number 1 receiver and, of course, teammate. But for many, they were expecting a 3rd or 4th place finish in 2021. So you get into the regular season, and Burrow's return from injury is pretty much as expected. Some growing pains. He needed some time to get acclimated into the game flow after several months off the field with recovering from that injury. But once you get to the midway point of the season and then the rest of the way onwards, it just seemed like he was growing rapidly, physically, mentally, with each game. Of course, it doesn't help that, you have one of the worst offensive lines of the league and taking some of the most sacks. His calm, collected demeanor, he wasn't really complaining much about that offensive line. It helped the Bengals with mostly good decision-making, multi-range passing, and, of course, his connection to Ja'Marr Chase. And speaking of Ja'Marr Chase, his instant breakout year, his offensive rookie of the year breakout campaign, it really helped Joe Burrow and also really helped Ja'Marr Chase with his speed and verticality to make catches. And then, of course, the supporting cast around those two, Joe Mixon at the running back position, his dual threat ability to get through the opposing defensive lines, and he was also a good passing option. He also had a good other supporting cast of receivers like Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and tight end C.J. Uzomah, who came on pretty late. And it really helped Cincinnati get defenses off of Ja'Marr Chase. So on the defensive side, the secondary was pretty solid. You had safeties Jesse Bates and Von Bell doing pretty solid, but they were sometimes getting torched, especially their corner that got signed again, Eli Apple. Like, why didn't they learn their lesson in letting him go? But anyway, I digress. But one of their strongest suits throughout the season was their front seven. A defensive front seven that had Hendrickson, B.J. Hill, Sam Hubbard, DJ Reader, Cameron Sample, and Jermaine Pratt. They were all very damn good in rushing and sacking the passer and getting some good stops on second and third downs. So for the Bengals, they were pretty competitive in what at least for most of the season, an all-out AFC North brawl. And there was also some times where they didn't look like the contender they eventually became. They had some pretty bad losses against the Jets, the Browns, the Chargers, and the 49ers that sometimes were followed up after they beat the brakes off of the likes of the Ravens and the Steelers. So for the Bengals, it was either a case of them, going on this hot win, or it was them in some pretty bad losses where they're either starting off too slow, that it's too late to come back, or they were just simply outmatched by their opponents. Fortunately for Cincinnati, by the point of week 15, you're 8-6, and you're seeing the entire division implode. The Steelers are washed as fuck. The Ravens are experiencing injury mania, and the Browns are back to being the skid marks. So it benefited them in a big way. You win your last 2 of 3. You get a comeback win over the Kansas City Chiefs at home to win the AFC North. You don't really need to win a final matchup against the Cleveland Browns. So you get a home matchup to begin your playoff push, and not many people believe that Cincinnati would make it past the divisional playoffs once you beat the Raiders, but they managed to surprise many. Joe Burrow overcame a 9-sack beating thanks to his terrible offensive line, and managed to make some critical throws, just enough to complement the defense's 3 interceptions on Ryan Tannehill. And Evan McPherson sent the 4-seeded Cincinnati Bengals to the AFC Championship game for the first time in over 30 years, upsetting the top-seeded Titans. So in that AFC Championship game, the Bengals got off to a very slow start. They were quickly down 21-3 against the Kansas City Chiefs, but Von Bell netted a huge interception in overtime after the Bengals stormed back in that game, and the Bengals milked that moment, all that they've been through, all the suffering, all the pain that they've endured throughout the years. And once Eric McPherson kicked another game-winning field goal, the Bengals on their way to another Super Bowl, their 3rd Super Bowl in franchise history. And for the Bengals to reach at this point, like in Joe Burrow's 2nd year, it was kind of like a pretty crazy thing. From going from the worst team in the NFL to pretty much one of the best in a very quick turnaround. Now, for the Bengals, it is kind of a lucky thing that they got here, though, unfortunately, because the offensive line, again, kind of failed Joe Burrow again. And sure, you can also say that Joe Burrow didn't make enough plays quickly enough, but how could he, to be honest with you, against an offensive line that just got brutally beaten by the Rams' vaunted duo of Aaron Donald and Von Miller in that game. Joe Burrow had nowhere to run, and most of the time his drives stalled, and the Bengals were also close to winning their first Super Bowl if the defense didn't get tired out. The offensive line was much better, but they just couldn't hold on to a 2016 lead, and they allowed Cooper Kupp to win the game, and the Bengals, for whatever reason, allowed Samaje Perine, their backup running back, to run it on a 3rd down to try again 1st down. And once again, on that final 4th down, the O-line just broke down, and Cincinnati just couldn't hold on. So for the Bengals, yes, it was a tough way to end their season. They were just so close to winning the Super Bowl, but they should be proud of that. They just made it to this point. They even got it to this point. Again, they were predicted by many to go 3rd or 4th place in the division. They're pretty much the basement dwellers in that AFC North. But then you go on this crazy ass run. You far exceed the expectations of many. Burrow progresses significantly throughout the 2021 season after a brutal 2020, and you add in Jamar Chase. It ended up being the right decision after all. Sure, you still have to fix the offensive line, but it ended up being the good choice for them after all. And then the defense picked up steam in the playoffs, and that really helped the offense get more opportunities over to get them the eventual victories over the Tennessee Titans and the Kansas City Chiefs to go to the Super Bowl. So for Cincinnati, the Bengals, and their fan base, a lot to be proud of this year. And yes, this may have been their best opportunity to win it all, despite getting to their ultimate goal very early in what was supposed to be their rebuild. I'd say the future looks pretty bright for these young Tigers in the AFC. Now, sure, it's still going to be pretty competitive in the AFC, but you have a new king of the North in the AFC North. So going into the offseason, the Bengals were pretty fortunate. Like, even though you lost the Super Bowl, you had the money to spend to go and make some moves, replenish your team. You had around $57 million in money to spend, and some of your key free agents include safeties Jesse Bates and Ricardo Allen, BJ Hill and Larry Ogunjobi, Riley Reef on the right tackle, CJ Uzomah and Trey Flowers. They franchise tagged Jesse Bates already last month, and the biggest thing that they did, the biggest priority need that they addressed, they did it. They addressed the offensive line, signing the likes of Bucs guard Alex Kappa, Cowboys right tackle La'el Collins, and Patriots center Ted Karras. So right off the bat in free agency, they addressed their top priority need: offensive line, offensive line, offensive line. So Joe Burrow has to be a happy man right now. So they did lose CJ Uzomah to the New York Jets, so another weapon in that offense gone, but I don't think they're fretting about it too much. So after all that spending on the offensive line, they have around $18 million left to spend. I bet a good chunk of it is going to go to their draft picks. So for Cincinnati, you're picking 31st in the draft, and I believe something that they could do for the rest of the offseason is just continue to add some depth to that O-line. Now, sure, you added these three big names that I just mentioned, but it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to add a little more depth to the offensive line, be it guard or tackle, because the current pieces that they had prior to those three signings, they weren't the greatest. They weren't the most consistent. Now, it doesn't mean that they should go using their very late first round pick on another guard or left tackle, but they should use like the later rounds to hopefully find some hidden gems. So that front office, that scouting department should be studying very well. That could be like rotational pieces for like the starting offensive line. I think they should also address the corner position in the draft, or maybe get like a bargain deal with whoever's available. The pass rush, as I like to say, that pass rush can be just as good if supported by a good secondary, including its corner group. Eli Apple, I don't know why they decided to re-sign him for another year, because he was getting burnt like a crispy motherfucker. So Cincy has to at least use their first round pick on the best available corner, or maybe use a day 2 pick to find that best available corner for defensive coordinator Lou Anamurambo. So if it's not in the draft, maybe they can get a veteran presence like Stephon Gilmore or Bryce Callahan to take a bargain deal, because maybe they're waiting for the draft to be over with to see who's going to take the bait. So overall, the Cincinnati Bengals, they surprised many people in 2021. You also got a good year out of Joe Burrow coming off that terrible ACL injury. Jamar Chase had an incredible year for a rookie. The defense caught on fire late in the season. I mean, sure, they didn't get it done in Super Bowl 56, but you got to give them credit. You got to give them credit for getting it to that point. And the AFC is going to be pretty competitive in 2022, but the Cincinnati Bengals are not just going to lie down, take the puck just yet, because, as you've seen throughout this offseason, they continue to get progressively better. And as long as they continue to add pieces around Joe Burrow, protect him well, the Cincinnati Bengals are not going to go down quietly just yet.